arterial pulse. So this is just a small graphical representation. What is arterial pulse? Okay, so in this we are going to see the arterial pulses. It is mainly due to the transmission of the pulse which is arising at the foot of the aorta. That is what you call as arterial pulse. As the name, the major great artery which is present in our body is the aorta. Again, the same picture you need to do it over here. And this is the aorta. Okay. So during the cardiac cycle, isovolumetric contraction phase, the ventricle is fully filled with the blood and the ventricle is going to contract. When the ventricle contracts, the blood enters into the aorta. So now the ventricles from the high pressure zone, it is going to become a low pressure zone. And this pressure is going to be transmitted to the walls of the aorta. So at one stage, what happens? Once when the ventricle completely empties all the blood into the aorta, it has become an empty place. So in order to prevent the backflow, reversal flow of blood from the high pressure area of aorta into the low pressure area of the ventricles, there is closure of the semilunar valves. So this pressure changes, whatever is happening at this point of time, we are recording. That is called as arterial pulse. So when you record an arterial pulse, you will get the graph in this way. This is called as anacrotic limb and the dicrotic limb, which has a small depression. This is dicrotic limb and this is anacrotic limb. And here you have a small notch called as dicrotic notch. This anacrotic limb, it is due to the depolarization during ventricular systole. So once when the ventricle is contracting, it means there is depolarization in the ventricle. So which is making the blood to enter into the aorta. Okay. So later on, when the depolarization reach the peak, in the sense it is going to repolarize. Do you understand? Yes? See, during ventricular systole, what is happening? The high, now at the isovolumetric contraction phase, the ventricles is remaining as a closed chamber. AV valve is closed, semilunar valve is closed, but it is fully filled with the blood. So the pressure is building up inside the ventricles. So this makes the semilunar valve to open. And that is the period where the ventricular systole is taking place. If the ventricular systole is taking place, it is mentioning that there is depolarization in the ventricles. During that period, you are measuring the pressure balance. The pressure which is present over the ventricles and the aorta, you are recording that. That is what giving you the arterial pulse. So at the isovolumetric contraction phase, since the ventricles is a closed chamber, it is building up high pressure, which is making the blood to move from the ventricles into the aorta. Yes, so it is making the blood to move from high pressure zone to the low pressure zone. So that when you record graphically, you will get the graph that is called as anacrotic limb. Okay, so that is anacrotic limb. And after the ventricular systole, the ventricle is contracted, the blood is ejected out of the ventricle. Then what is going to happen? The ventricles should relax. That is the next phase. After depolarization, you should get the repolarization. So this entire phase is called as repolarization. This is called as dichrotic limb. The increase is anachrotic limb and decrease of the graph is dichrotic limb. But here, during the dichrotic limb, there is a specific significant location which is going to give you a notch. In the sense, at some point of repolarization, there is a small increase in the pressure in the ventricles, which is giving you a notch. What is that? Is the blood is moving from the ventricles into the aorta. The blood has moved from ventricles into the aorta. Now the ventricular pressure becomes low and the aortic pressure becomes high. Yes or no? So always blood will move from high pressure to the low pressure zone. Once when the blood moves from the ventricles into the aorta, immediately at the end of ventricular systole, it is also the beginning of ventricular diastole. We will term it as protodiastolic period of the cardiac cycle. So in that phase, there is closure of the semilunar valves. Why? Because now the ventricular is considered as a low pressure zone and the aorta is considered to be the high pressure zone. There is chance of blood to move from high pressure to the low pressure zone. That is called as reversal flow or backflow of blood. So, even though if the semilunar valve is closed, because of the high pressure difference from this aorta to the ventricles, the valve will slightly bulge towards the ventricles. This bulging of the semilunar valve during the repolarization of the ventricles is giving you a small notch in the dichrotic limb, that is called as dichrotic notch. Understood? Yes? So this is what is the recording of arterial pulse. And next we will see about the venous pulse. So what is meant by venous pulse? Understood with the arterial pulse? Yes. So what is venous pulse? So it is the pulse which is transmitted near the veins of the heart. Okay. So it is the pulse which is transmitted in the form of a wave near the veins of the heart. The pulse which is transmitted that is called as venous pulse. So this venous pulse cannot be observed in all the veins. We can observe this venous pulse only in few larger veins, especially the jugular vein. So that is the most common venous pulse we will always measure. That is jugular venous pulse. Okay. So why this jugular venous pulse is basically considered rather than other veins is because again the heart picture. Okay, so far in the arterial pulse we are talking more with the left side where the aorta is emerging, and in case of this venous pulse we will mainly consider the right side of the heart. Okay, and then why? Because so this is giving pulmonary artery, and there you have the lungs where the pulmonary artery is giving the supply. So for example, in case of any pulmonary diseases or if there is pulmonary edema, whatever may be the cause, there is accumulation of blood inside the lungs. So it means there is already high pressure in the arterial system of the lungs. Okay. So during the ventricular systole, again, the ventricles from the right side of the heart is going to pump blood through the pulmonary artery into the lungs. Yes or no? Okay. But there is some abnormality in the lungs which makes the blood to accumulate in the lungs already. So what will happen? The blood is always following the mechanism from high pressure to low pressure. It should move. So now the pulmonary artery is having the high pressure after the ventricular systole. So if the lungs is empty, this pulmonary artery will give blood to the lungs. But there is no empty space in the lungs. Already there is accumulated blood in the lungs. So what will happen? The blood will not reach the ventricles, lungs to the required level. So ventricular blood will not be ejected entirely. And then followed by this, what will happen? Since the ventricle is already having a high pressure zone due to the accumulated blood in the right side of the ventricle, during atrial systole, there is no complete ejection of blood from atrium into the ventricles. So what happens? Followed by this, inferior vena cava, superior vena cava, and then consider this as the brain. The inferior vena cava, it is from the external jugular vein, internal jugular vein, and the common jugular vein, and all these is getting drained in the inferior vena cava. So here there is pooling of blood in the right atrium because of some abnormality at the level of the pulmonary system. So what happens? This venous return will not be in a proper way. So finally, we will encounter this as jugular venous distension. Yes or no? So it indicates some abnormality in the right side of the heart. The cause may be in the pulmonary or the cause may be in the cardiology, whatever it is. So this is one of the indication with the pulmonary circulation abnormality. It may be at the level of lungs or it may be at the level of the heart. So this is why the most commonly measured venous pulse is the jugular venous pulse. As like that of arterial pulse, here also we will get a small graphical representation. You will get the graphical representation like this, and we are naming it as A, C and P. They are upward deflection, so they are called as positive waves. And you also has X, X1 and Y, the downward deflection, and we will term it as negative waves. And why these waves are being formed is mainly this A wave is the first wave which is formed mainly during the pressure which is built up at the atrial systole. Okay, so due to the pressure rise in the atrium during systole, because the pressure is raised in the atrium due to the filling of blood in the atrium. So that increases the atrial pressure and it makes the atrial systole to happen. So the blood is moving from the upper chambers to the lower chambers. So this rise of the pressure in the atrium during the systole is giving you the wave called as A wave. Okay, clear? And next, followed by C wave. It occurs due to the rise in the atrial pressure during the isovolumetric contraction period. In isovolumetric contraction period, what is happening? isovolumetric contraction. The ventricles is closed. Okay, so the ventricles is remaining as a closed chamber and the atrium is still filled with the blood because of the continuous venous return, and that also builds up a pressure, but that pressure is slightly less when compared to that of the pressure at the atrial systolic phase. So you will get a small upward deflection that is called as C wave. Okay, and finally the V wave, it is due to the rise in the pressure during the isovolumetric relaxation phase. During isovolumetric relaxation phase, the ventricles is a closed chamber but it is empty. So atrium is going to contract again to push blood from upper chambers to the lower chambers. So there is a buildup of pressure in the atrium during the isovolumetric contraction phase of the ventricles. So that is going to generate again a positive upward deflection called as V wave. So all this is dealing with the atrial pressures. See, V wave is, what is C wave? C wave is due to the isovolumetric contraction phase. During isovolumetric contraction phase, the ventricles is a closed chamber, but it is fully filled with the blood because it is going to make the contraction in the ventricles to do the ejection of blood into the pulmonary and systemic circulation. During the meantime of ventricular systole, the one which is happening but we will not consider in the ECG is atrial relaxation. So atrium is filled with the blood. When the atrium is filled with the blood, it means the pressure in the atrium is increasing. So that is giving you the C wave. The pressure raised in the atrium during isovolumetric contraction because of the venous return into the atrium. It may be due to superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, or due to the pulmonary vein in both sides, right and left side. In case of V wave, this is due to the pressure raised in the atrium during isovolumetric relaxation phase. So in isovolumetric relaxation phase, the ventricles is a closed chamber, but it is empty. In the sense, it is having low pressure and the atrium is having high pressure because of the venous return. So this pressure build up during the isovolumetric relaxation phase, and this pressure build up in this phase makes the AV valves to open and the blood will come from upper chamber to the lower chamber. So that is what you call as V wave. So this is the description about the three positive waves. And now we will move on to the events in the negative waves of the venous pulse. The first one is X. So it indicates that at one point there is a fall in atrial pressure. The upward deflection is positivity, means raise in the pressure. If it is coming to the opposite direction, negative deflection, downward deflection, means there is a position where the atrial pressure is coming down. In which place the atrial position is coming down, which makes it over here is at the point of coincidence with the atrial diastole and beginning of ventricular systole. See, all these arterial pressure, venous pressure, ECG, heart sounds, everything will bring the cardiac cycle story into the scenario. Okay, so the atrial diastole, which we will not consider in the ECG because it is happening at the same time of the ventricular systole, which is more importantly to be considered. So at the point, at the beginning of ventricular systole, there is a small drop of pressure in the atrium because it has just emptied the blood from upper chambers to the lower chambers. At that small duration of period, the atrial pressure is slightly decreased. Later on, it is still again continuously filled with the venous pooling of blood. So initially, at the end of atrial systole and the beginning of ventricular systole, you have a small negativity in the atrial pressure. So that is what you are recording as a small negative deflection in the venous pressure. And the next one is Y wave, X dash. It is may called as X1 or X dash. This is due to the fall in the arterial pressure during the ejection period. During the atrial systole, the blood is ejected from upper chamber to the lower chamber. So at that period of time, so here it is isovolumetric contraction phase. Okay, during isovolumetric contraction phase, followed by this, what in isovolumetric contraction, ventricle is contracting and releasing the blood to the systemic and pulmonary circulation. Now the ventricle is going to get back the blood from the atrium. So it means the atrium is contracting. Atrium is contracting, giving blood to the ventricles. At that point, ventricular pressure increases. Initially, after the end of the atrial systole, the atrial pressure is low. So that place is called as X1, that is at the ejection period. And then later on, the wave called as Y, it is due to the opening of AV valve. The opening of AV valve from upper chambers to the lower chambers, blood is entering. Now this ventricles has become the high pressure zone and the atrium has become the low pressure zone, which makes the AV valve to close. So there are three locations where the atrial pressure increases, atrial pressure decreases. Since the atrium is closely located to the pulmonary vein and the superior inferior vena cava, but we cannot easily measure the pressure differences in the pulmonary vein, but we can easily measure the differences in the jugular vein. So this will give the estimation of right side of the venous pressure, and since it is close proximation with the left side, we are considering it as a venous pulse. Okay, so this is what is about the atrial pulse and the venous pulse.